It's your responsibility and your job to make sure every hazmat load you haul arrives safely and securely at its destination. It's critical to the safety and security of the hazardous materials transportation process that you know and understand what's required and that you're trained to get the job done right. So let's see what you need to know. Hazardous materials are categorized into 9 hazard classes, with some of them further broken down into divisions. Divisions provide extra information about a material's hazards. For example, Class 2, gases, has 3 divisions. 2.1 is flammable gas. 2.2 is non-flammable compressed gas. And 2.3 is poison gas. And depending on the hazard class, some hazardous materials are divided into one of 3 specific packing groups. Packing Group 1 indicates great danger. Packing Group 2, medium danger. And Packing Group 3, minor danger. Remember, not all hazard classes have packing groups. These include Class 2, gases, Class 7, radioactive, ORMD materials, some Class 9, miscellaneous hazardous materials, and some Division 6.2, infectious substances. This information, hazard class, division, and packing group, can all be found in the Hazardous Materials table located in the Hazardous Materials Regulations, or HMR. The Hazardous Materials, or Hazmat table, lists all of the proper shipping names that can be used to describe hazardous materials transported in the U.S. The table provides essential information and guidelines on how hazmat must be packaged and transported. The Hazmat table also lists the UN, NA, or ID identification number, required labels, and any special provisions that correspond with each proper shipping name. Other columns of the table provide HMR section references for exceptions, packaging information, and maximum quantities for shipping by air and rail. 2 appendices follow the Hazmat table and are referred to as Appendix A and Appendix B. Appendix A, the list of hazardous substances and reportable quantities, lists materials that present an environmental hazard when shipped in certain quantities. The material's reportable quantity. Appendix B, the list of marine pollutants, lists materials that could harm the marine environment. As a driver, you should always have a copy of the Hazmat table with you. Why? Because most of the key information on your shipping papers and packages is obtained from it. How else can you verify that information?
If there were to be an incident somewhere where if you were in some type of accident or rollover, something of this nature, when the first responders would be on the scene, that when they open the door, they can reach right into the pouch on the side of the door where your hazmat bill should be, and they can tell exactly what's on that load.
Proper documentation of hazardous materials is critical. In order for a hazardous material to be safely transported, it must be properly described on the shipping papers, when shipping papers are required. For most shipments, properly prepared shipping papers will include the basic description of the hazardous material. It is imperative that the basic description be entered on the shipping papers in the right order or sequence. The items that make up the basic description must appear in this order: the UN, NA or ID identification number, proper shipping name, primary hazard class or division number, subsidiary hazard class or division number in parentheses, and packing group if there is one. This information can be found in columns 2 through 6 of the Hazmat table. The total quantity of the hazardous material is required on the shipping paper as well as the number and type of packages. If a load consists of both hazardous and non-hazardous materials, the hazardous materials must stand out on the shipping paper. Any hazmat needs to be clearly listed in case of an accident or incident. The shipper may indicate hazmat by listing the hazardous materials first, or listing them in contrasting color, or inserting an X, or if appropriate, an RQ for reportable quantities in the column designated HM for hazardous materials. In most cases, shipping papers must also contain the shipper's certification. This simply states that a shipment is properly classed, packed, marked, labeled, and placarded, and is in proper condition for transportation. It's the shipper's responsibility to prepare the shipping papers, but drivers and anyone else involved with the hazardous materials shipment must know how to read and understand the information entered on the shipping papers. One area you should pay particular attention to is the emergency response information requirements. At a minimum, you should receive the basic description of the hazardous material, the immediate health hazards, fire or explosion risks, immediate precautions to take in the event of an incident, how to handle a fire, spill, or leak, preliminary first aid measures to take, and an emergency response phone number. The shipper may list emergency response information on or attach it to the shipping papers, or it may be provided to you via the emergency response guidebook or by an attached safety data sheet, an SDS, that contains all the required information. An emergency response phone number must also be listed on the shipping papers for most hazardous materials. Make sure an emergency response phone number is listed before you start your trip. Shipping papers must be readily available at all times in case of an emergency or roadside inspection. This means they must be visible and within reach while you're restrained by your seatbelt. When you're out of the cab, put the shipping papers in the driver's side door pouch or lay them on the driver's seat. How a material is packaged and marked is an important part of the hazardous materials transportation process.
If something doesn't look right, chances are it's not right. The best place to catch a problem is while it's on the shipper's dock. Don't take an item that doesn't look like it's packaged right, it's not labeled right, it's not banded on the skid right, leave it there. Better off leaving a shipment behind than you taking it. Now it's your company's problem.
Non-bulk hazardous materials are generally shipped in what's called performance-oriented packaging, POP, or UN packaging. The standards for these kinds of packaging are stringent, which makes it unlikely that a hazmat package will leak during transportation. You'll see a manufacturer's UN marking on these types of packages. This indicates that the package conforms to United Nations standards. On most non-bulk packages, the shipper must display a proper shipping name, identification number, and the name and address of the shipper or receiver. Other markings that you may see include this side up arrows, ORMD, which stands for Other Regulated Materials and represents a consumer commodity, and limited quantity markings. All package markings must be clearly visible and printed in English. Markings must be in a contrasting color and printed on the package or attached to the surface in the form of a label, sign, or tag. Hazmat markings must also be placed apart from other package markings that could substantially reduce their effectiveness, such as advertising. On bulk packages, the material's identification number must be displayed as described in the regulations. If a bulk container holds less than 1,000 gallons, the identification number must be marked on two opposite sides. If the container holds 1,000 gallons or more, the identification number must be marked on both sides and both ends. The identification number marking can be displayed in black on an orange panel, or across the center of a primary hazard placard, or on a plain white square-on-point configuration, the same size as a placard. Generally, when a bulk package, such as a portable tank or cargo tank, is transported, the identification number for the hazardous material it contains must be marked on all four sides of the package, or in some cases, on the transport vehicle itself. You can see by the different marking requirements that how a hazardous material is packaged and marked is critical to its safe transport. Hazard warning labels provide an immediate warning of the hazards involved and are required on most non-bulk packages. It's the shipper's responsibility to select and attach the proper labels. As a driver, you're responsible to make sure that it's done correctly. You'll see that some materials have more than one label because they present multiple hazards. Labels are placed on the surface of a package near the shipping name. If the package is smaller than the label, or if it's a cylinder or an odd shape, a label may be placed on a tag that is securely attached to the package. Hazard warning labels must be clearly visible so they're not confused with other package markings. The regulations state that you shouldn't accept a hazardous materials shipment unless the required labels are affixed to the packages being shipped. As with markings and placards, labels can help you quickly identify a hazmat shipment and the hazards it presents. Placards are similar to labels in that they serve as a hazard warning. Placards must be displayed on each side and each end of most bulk packages and transport vehicles. At the scene of an accident or incident, placards identify what types of hazardous materials are present in the transport vehicle or freight container, so emergency responders know the right actions to take to keep the public safe. The required placards are listed in one of two placard tables in the HMR. Placarding Table 1 lists the hazardous materials that require placards, regardless of what quantity is being transported. The most dangerous categories of hazardous materials are listed in Table 1. Placarding Table 2 lists the hazardous materials that must be placarded if the aggregate gross weight of all Table 2 materials being transported in non-bulk packages equals or exceeds 1,001 pounds. Non-bulk packages covered by Table 2 that contain less than 1,001 pounds aggregate gross weight of hazmat do not need to display a placard. In some situations, if two or more categories of materials from Table 2 are shipped together, a dangerous placard may be used instead of several individual primary hazard placards. However, if one of these categories of materials weighs 2,205 pounds or more and is loaded at one location, the placard specified in Table 2 for that category must be used, and separate placards must be used for any other categories which may be present. And some hazmat with more than one hazard must be placarded to show the multiple hazards. While there are specific standards for the size, color, and design of placards, the most important and obvious requirement is visibility. A placard must be clearly visible from the direction it faces and must be securely attached to the vehicle or container. As a driver, it's your responsibility to display the placards you're given and to make sure that they're the correct placards for the hazardous materials you're transporting. Generally, placards must be left in place until a non-bulk load is unloaded and until a bulk container is cleaned and purged of any hazardous material. There are a number of steps you must take in preparing a hazmat load for shipment. Be sure to always set your parking brake and shock your wheels before loading or unloading to prevent the vehicle from moving. Packages of hazardous materials must be secured to prevent shifting, including relative motion between packages during transport.
First thing we would look at if it's on a skid, is it wrapped properly to the skid? If it's drums, are the drums wrapped and or banded? Are they wrapped or banded to the skid? When you're going down the road, all the freight moves and it bounces around.
Whenever a cargo tank is loaded or unloaded, the regulations require that a qualified person be present or in attendance. The qualified person has to be someone who is knowledgeable about the material being loaded or unloaded, knows what to do in an emergency situation, and is authorized and has the means to move the cargo tank if necessary. As a driver, you must know which non-bulk hazardous materials can be shipped together. Some classes and divisions of hazmat cannot be loaded together. Some hazmat can be loaded together, but only if the hazmat is segregated. This is where the hazardous materials load and segregation requirements come into play. The hazmat segregation table enables you to determine which materials can be loaded, shipped, and stored together. It's easy to read and use. An X indicates that materials cannot be loaded and stored together. An O indicates that they cannot be loaded together unless they're separated to prevent the materials from mixing in the event of an accident or incident. And if the space is blank, it means that no restrictions apply. For Class 1 explosives, you may see a star or an asterisk. This indicates that segregation among some of the different Class 1 explosives is governed by a separate compatibility table used only for Class 1 explosives. An integral part of transporting hazardous materials is getting the shipment safely to its destination.
You have a lot more responsibility with a hazmat load because of the nature of the freight. So you need to ensure that it's loaded and secured properly, and that you placard it properly, and that it is labeled properly so that you're able to communicate the threat in the event of an accident or an incident.
As far as safety goes, we all know that vehicle inspections are an everyday necessity. In addition to inspecting your tires during your pre-trip, inspect them each time you park your vehicle. And don't forget your post-trip inspection either. When checking your tires, it's a good idea to also take time to make sure all your placards are in place and in good condition. If any are damaged or missing, replace them. While fueling, the engine must be shut off, and you or someone else must be in control of the fueling process. When you're out on the road, do not park on or within 5 feet of a road unless you must stop for a brief period and other parking isn't available. If you're transporting a 1.1, 1.2, or 1.3 explosive, you must not park on or within 5 feet of a road. Do not park within 300 feet of an open fire, a bridge, tunnel, or a dwelling, or any place where people gather. And do not drive near an open fire unless you can safely pass without stopping. Do not smoke in or within 25 feet of your vehicle if you're transporting explosives, oxidizers, flammable materials, or an empty tank vehicle that contains flammables. Unless there are no practical alternatives, follow marked hazmat routes, which are located away from heavily populated areas, tunnels, narrow streets, and alleys. It's crucial that you know the specific requirements for the materials you transport. If you're uncertain what these requirements are, talk with your supervisor before heading out. There's no excuse for not knowing hazmat requirements and your motor carrier's policies. When you're hauling hazardous materials, it's extremely important that you know what to do if you have an accident or incident. A hazmat incident is defined as any unintentional release of a hazardous material from its package.
First thing you want to do is secure the scene. If you have a spill, you want to secure the spill, contact law enforcement, and move people away from the vehicle.
If this occurs, it's your job to know your motor carrier's policy on incidents, to follow it, and within that policy, to be as helpful as possible. This includes helping keep people away from the scene and immediately notifying your motor carrier. Accident and incident reports need to be made promptly, and it's your job to contact your motor carrier in either situation. Hazmat is most at risk when it's being transported. Your vehicle could even be used as a weapon of mass destruction. Therefore, it's of the utmost importance that you know how to keep your load, the public, and yourself safe. All hazmat employees, including drivers, must receive security awareness training. The training must cover the security risks associated with transporting hazardous materials and methods to enhance transportation security. Security awareness training must also cover how to recognize a potential security threat and how to respond accordingly. In addition, some hazmat employees must receive in-depth security training if their employer is required to have a security plan. Security awareness training took on a new and immediate importance following the horrendous attacks of 9/11. We won't forget the events that occurred that day, and we'll remember to remain alert and vigilant on our watch to ensure something like that never happens again. Motor carriers are not strangers to security awareness training. Still, it's important that all risks be identified during load preparation, load inspection, load transportation, and load delivery. Those risks may change from time to time. That's why security awareness training is needed, to remind us to be aware of anything that looks out of place and to know what to do in response. It's easy to become complacent with the passage of time, but never let your guard down. How many times have you heard drivers are the eyes and ears of the company when out on the road? It's also true that drivers play an important role in alerting law enforcement and emergency personnel of anything that may require their immediate attention. Drivers may face numerous threats: cargo contamination or cargo theft, hijacking, kidnapping, bodily harm, and even death. Drivers have to be on the lookout for suspicious activities or behavior associated with your planned route, visual contact with your load, truck stops and rest stops, traffic lights and any unplanned stops, unidentified authorities, stopped vehicles, and unlit or dangerous areas. It's easy to see that there's plenty for you to do. What can your motor carrier do for you? Establish procedures for tracking shipments. Schedule checkpoints and check-in times along your route. Provide a 24-hour number for you to call. Keep actual time out on the road down to a minimum. And install extra locks and alarms where needed. When it comes down to safety and security, it's everybody's business. But as a driver, it's up to you to always be alert for anything that doesn't seem right. Your sense of awareness, along with your training, may save someone's life.
You should have pride in your work. Make sure you're doing everything right. The rules from the FMCSA are put in place for not only our safety, but more importantly, to protect the public.
There's a lot to know and remember about the hazmat transportation process. Your part in this process is key to keeping hazmat safe and secure from point A to point B and the route in between. Because of the unique responsibilities you have as a hazmat driver, it's imperative to take the time needed to understand the significance of your role and to become familiar with the hazardous materials regulations. Always know the specifics about each load you'll transport and how it must be handled in order for it to arrive safely at its destination. And always take the necessary steps to prevent an accidental release of hazmat on the road. By doing so, we can count on you to succeed and to keep us safe from the potential dangers associated with the transportation of hazardous materials. It's your responsibility and your job to make sure every hazmat load you haul arrives safely and securely at its destination. It's critical to the safety and security of the hazardous materials transportation process that you know and understand what's required and that you're trained to get the job done right. So let's see what you need to know. Hazardous materials are categorized into 9 hazard classes, with some of them further broken down into divisions. Divisions provide extra information about a material's hazards. For example, Class 2, gases, has 3 divisions. 2.1 is flammable gas. 2.2 is non-flammable compressed gas. And 2.3 is poison gas. And depending on the hazard class, some hazardous materials are divided into one of 3 specific packing groups. Packing Group 1 indicates great danger, Packing Group 2, medium danger, and Packing Group 3, minor danger. Remember, not all hazard classes have packing groups. These include Class 2, gases, Class 7, radioactive, ORMD materials, some Class 9, miscellaneous hazardous materials, and some Division 6.2, infectious substances. This information, hazard class, division, and packing group, can all be found in the hazardous materials table located in the Hazardous Materials Regulations, or HMR. The Hazardous Materials, or Hazmat table, lists all of the proper shipping names that can be used to describe hazardous materials transported in the U.S. The table provides essential information and guidelines on how hazmat must be packaged and transported. The Hazmat table